Once the royal family's happy couple, with a wedding as beautiful as a fairy tale and two handsome princes. It seemed they would weather all storms together. Yet, because of a woman many commentators deemed unworthy, he left his wife and family. One wonders, now at the age of 76, does he ever feel remorse? On July 15, 2025, an old jewelry box was delivered to Clarence's house, covered in the dust of time and the silence that had lasted nearly 3 decades. The box once belonged to Princess Diana and had been stored in a private archive at Althorp, her final resting place. No one expected that inside would be not only priceless jewels, but also tear-stained secrets letters never sent, a lost audio recording, and even a handwritten note bearing her final wish, all speaking of love, loss, and a forever missed chance at reconciliation. When Charles III opened the velvet-lined blue box, no one could have imagined how utterly the king's expression would collapse. He did not cry like a man in pain. He trembled, silent, like a child facing the consequences of a long-buried mistake. What lay inside that box was not merely memories. It was an awakening. The man who was once the Prince of Wales is now the King of England, but also a father, a former husband, a man who lost the most beloved woman in the world. The jewels were not only wrapped in velvet, but also in memories. He had tried to bury a sapphire brooch he gave her for her 25th birthday, a pearl necklace she wore on her first official trip after Harry was born, and finally a handwritten note in which Diana wrote, "If one day you understand how much I loved you, it may already be too late." Now the question is no longer why did Diana die, but rather why was that love betrayed, abandoned in the dark, and replaced by something as cold as royal duty. The event of Charles receiving the jewelry box sent shockwaves not only through the royal household but also among the public. For the first time in many years, the king was seen without composure. Because truth, when it arrives at the right moment, can shake even a throne. So, what exactly was in that box that broke a King will Charles make public a truth that could completely rewrite royal history? This is no longer a story of the past. This is a new chapter where the past demands to be acknowledged with honesty. And if Charles has the courage to open his heart, not just the box, then perhaps he still has a chance to mend what he once let fall apart. Leave a comment below. Do you think Charles should reveal everything that was in the box? Click like and share if you believe justice for Diana is never too late. And don't forget to subscribe as we continue to uncover the greatest secret of the British royal family in the 21st century. Everything began on a cold, gray morning, when Buckingham Palace was still cloaked in silence after a long night of rain. Outside, the ancient trees stood still, their last summer leaves heavy with dew, quietly trembling in the early autumn breeze. In the West Wing's grand hall, a butler dressed in formal black approached the king's private library door, a rare hint of confusion on his face. In his hands was a parcel, carefully wrapped in pale brown parchment, with each fold meticulously sealed, no return address. Only 4 handwritten letters in blue ink, Windsor. As the butler placed the parcel on the oak table by the window, the king's eyes caught the handwriting on the label. A flicker of hesitation crossed his face. Those 4 letters were not merely his name. It was the handwriting, a handwriting eerily familiar, elegant, slightly tilted to the right, with each O looped tightly, a distinctive flourish he had seen hundreds of times before on birthday cards, hurried notes left beside his pillow whenever he returned from royal duties. It was Diana's handwriting. Charles said nothing. He carefully picked up the parcel and gestured for the servant to leave the room. When the door closed, the silence thickened. He sat down on the blue velvet chair by the window and placed the parcel on his lap. His hands, no longer as steady as before, trembled slightly as he removed each layer of parchment. Time seemed to stand still. Inside was a dark mahogany wooden box, so exquisitely crafted that one could tell it was made specifically for someone of noble lineage. On the lid, The Spencer family crest was embossed a red and white shield with a stylized V symbol, representing Diana's generation, a detail only someone truly close would recognize. Beneath the lid, held in place by a silver ribbon, was a handwritten letter on Ritz Paris stationery. The date at the top, August the 29th, 1897. Just 2 days before Diana's fatal accident in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. Charles no longer heard the wind outside or the distant chimes of the clock. All he could hear was the pounding of his own heart. He untied the ribbon and opened the letter. My dear Charles, I don't know if this letter will ever reach you, and perhaps I'll never know your reaction. But I still want to write, not because of what has passed, but because of what remains. I do not write this letter in anger or regret. I write because I still love you, even if you no longer love me. Even if the distance between us is now the cold halls of Buckingham Palace and the empty lights of the stage, the feelings in me have never truly faded. I miss you, not the man in royal meetings or public statements. I miss the man who once snuck me out of a party to eat pudding in Kensington. The one who sat for hours just to listen to me talk, just to see me smile. The one who whispered everything will be all right when I was first mocked by the public. I don't need you to come back. I ask for nothing. I just want you to know in those early years, I was truly happy. And if you can, even just once, please remember that time. Remember it for me. Remember it for us. With all the love that remains. Diana, reading to this point, Charles lowered the letter, but his eyes remained fixed on every stroke of her handwriting, as if afraid that a single blink would make it vanish like a mirage. A familiar scent began to fill the enclosed space. That gentle, elegant fragrance had never changed Quelques Fleurs, the classic French perfume Diana loved. The scent was like a whisper from the beyond, rendering his senses numb. Drawn back to a moment long past, Charles remembered the first time he gave Diana that perfume during their first official visit to Paris in 1981. She had been surprised, then burst into delighted laughter, burying her face in his shoulder and whispering, I'll only wear this when I'm with you. Over the years, he had tried to forget it, but with just one breath, everything returned as if it had never left. He placed his hand on the lid of the wooden box, feeling the coolness of the aged mahogany. What else was inside? Words left unsaid, mementos never given, or were they the final remnants of a love once brilliant, torn apart by a crown, by public opinion, and by his own weakness? Charles whispered softly, unsure to whom, to Diana, to himself, or to the past now flooding the room, I'm sorry. He had never said it. Not during the year she was alive. Not in interviews afterward, but now, when every title, every power, every piece of prestige meant nothing in the face of a letter from the dead, he could do nothing but admit he had lost the most precious thing in his life. And perhaps even he could never forgive himself. Everything seemed to have ended with the final words of the first letter. However, beneath the thin layer of silk lining the bottom of the box, Charles discovered a second envelope. It was different from the first letter in both form and emotion. The paper had yellowed, the ink strokes rushed and messy, as if written in a moment of overwhelming emotion. On the outside of the envelope was a single line, open only when you are truly ready to know the whole truth. Charles held the letter in his hands for a long time. The wind outside Buckingham whispered softly through the thick glass window, but inside the room, there was only a deathly stillness. He knew that once he opened it, there would be no turning back. Though his heart had endured enough pain, enough regret, enough loss, he had never prepared himself to face something like this. And then, with a slow motion like someone touching a memory turned to ashes, Charles tore open the envelope. The paper inside trembled in his hands, as if another soul were present in the room, and that was the soul of the woman he once loved. The letter was dated August 30th, 1997, just one day before Diana died. It began not with a greeting, but with a confession that made Charles stop breathing. Charles, if you're reading this, then I'm probably no longer here. And if that's the case, let me tell you the truth I've hidden my entire life. Diana confessed that in 1980, amid the quiet fractures in her marriage to Charles, she became pregnant with a baby girl. Elizabeth Rose, she wrote. Her name was Elizabeth, after your mother, and Rose after my sister. She was a child who carried both of us in flesh, in love, and in tragedy. The letter continued to describe the months of pregnancy in secret. Diana had told no one, not even those closest to her, because she feared the story would be twisted, distorted, or worse, turned into a stain on the royal family. She lived in fear, in loneliness, and with a fragile hope of keeping the baby. But fate did not grant her that chance. Elizabeth Rose was born prematurely and could not survive. Diana quietly held a simple funeral on the Spencer family's private estate at Althorpe. No media lenses, no royal priest, just her, a tear-soaked scarf, and a shattered heart. I visit her grave every year on December 23rd, Diana wrote. You once asked why I always seemed so withdrawn at Christmas. I told you it was because I missed my mother. But the truth is, missed our daughter. By now, Charles's hands had begun to tremble. A wave of cold shock coursed through his body like an icy current. He didn't know how much of what he was reading he could believe. But all doubt vanished when he found a small object wrapped in velvet fabric at the bottom of the box. It was an old silver locket, intricately engraved with delicate craftsmanship. When Charles opened it, he saw two tiny photos pressed side by side. One was a black and white picture of him and Diana, taken during the early days of their courtship. The other was an ultrasound image of a small fetus, with the words E. Rose, 1985, faintly printed into the corner. Charles felt as though someone had just stabbed him in the chest with an icy blade. Pain. Pain so deep it couldn't even become sound. Memories raced through his mind, the arguments, the misunderstandings, the cold glances that, had he known the pain Diana was carrying, he might have embraced her, might have protected everything. He sat still for a long time, then held the locket to his chest. No longer a king, no longer a divorced husband, no longer a symbol of a proud monarchy. In that moment, he was simply a father who had never met his own child, a man who had lived his whole life making the wrong choices, now haunted by a truth revealed too late. Diana's heart, the woman once judged, criticized, even shunned by the world, now appeared like a silent angel. She endured that pain alone, not because she was weak, but because she wanted to protect his honor, the family, and a monarchy she knew would never accept that child's existence. The bigger question now was why? Why did Diana choose to send these letters just days before her death? Did she sense something? Did anyone else know about Elizabeth Rose besides her? And deeper still, Charles had to face the most painful question no one else could answer for him. If he had known everything earlier, would he have changed? Would he have chosen Diana again? Chosen their family? The truth about Elizabeth Rose is not just a tragedy of a forgotten child. It is the symbol of everything that was lost, a love left unprotected, a mother misunderstood, and a father now left only with a slow-burning regret in every beat of his heart. And then the room returned to silence. Only the faint scent of perfume remained, Diana's old fragrance, still lingering in the box like a late farewell from the woman who had loved, had forgiven, and had gone, never to return. It seemed things had not yet come to an end. When the locket finally lay still in Charles's hand, a deep and unrelenting remorse surged within him. But less than a day after discovering the truth about Elizabeth Rose, a close aide unexpectedly brought him a small item wrapped in dark blue silk, accompanied by a note found at the bottom of the box. Charles opened it, and before him was an old notebook. Its leather cover faded with time. The faint words at the top simply read, D. Spencer, Private Journal, July 1997. Without hesitation, Charles turned each page. Every gentle stroke of handwriting seemed to carry Diana's final breath. The diary entries were not merely daily records, but confessions, deep scratches into the soul of a woman who had lived with both love and torment. July 15th, 1997, it was the date that made him freeze. Charles, I couldn't sleep tonight. There is something I must confess. There are nights I sit alone in the garden at Kensington, thinking about you, about the days when we were something pure. I used to be so angry at you, even hated you, but deep inside, I never stopped loving you. I regret putting everything in the press for turning my pain into a public battlefield. At that point, Charles's hands began to tremble. He too had pushed back against Diana with silence, by turning away when she needed him most. He thought she was playing politics. He had never imagined that this woman would write such words, alone in the night. Then came a passage he couldn't tear his eyes from. I miss Highgrove, miss the chair by the fireplace where you held me after Harry was born. I remember how you trembled, laughing and crying at the same time from happiness. That was the Charles that I loved, not the prince, not the heir to the throne, but the father, the husband, the lover. I saw you like that, and I held on to that image to keep going. Diana had not forgotten and perhaps had never stopped hoping. What the public saw was defiance, was rebellion. But the diary revealed a different Diana, a woman who loved to the point of exhaustion, then chose to endure in silence so that no one else would be hurt. Charles's emotions now clashed violently within him. He, a man who had always lived within the boundaries of duty, now stood before a truth he had never prepared for, that love had never died, only buried beneath the layers of title and royal expectation. And then, as if to drive the memory deeper, a small cassette tape was found among the pages of the journal. A simple note written in blue ink for Charles, listen when you are ready. Charles walked alone into the reading room at the palace. He placed the tape into the old cassette player still kept in the library. A soft static filled the air. Then Diana's voice emerged, gentle, trembling, but full of emotion. Dearest Charles, if you're listening to this tape, I suppose you found what I left behind. I don't know if I'll have time to say it all, but if I'm no longer here, then at least you'll know what I truly felt. Her voice paused for a few seconds, as if holding back emotion. I'm sorry for hurting you, for the interviews, for the defiance. I didn't want to turn a pain into a weapon, but when there was no other way to be heard, I did it. I was wrong, Charles. I never meant to be your enemy. The recording continued, now laced with a quiet choke. I still remember the night Harry was born. You held me, and tears fell onto my cheeks. It was one of the happiest nights of my life. Never forget, that love was real no matter what came after. The tape ended in silence. Charles did not move. He sat frozen before the player, his eyes wet with tears, as if paralyzed by a storm within. All these years, he had believed Diana had forgotten him, that the love was only a memory distorted by scandal and media assault. But no, it was still there, buried deep in every line, every word, every final keepsake she left behind. Now what Diana wanted was no longer publicity, no longer a fight for power in the royal family. It was forgiveness, a longing that, even if only in Charles's heart, she would still be remembered as the loving wife, the soulmate, the woman who had once and forever been a part of his life. The bigger question now is, what will Charles do with these secrets, the truth about Elizabeth Rose, Diana's heartfelt confessions, and the undeniable proof that she never stopped loving him? All of it now rests in the hands of a man who was once at the center of the tragedy, but who is also the only one who can write its final chapter. And perhaps, in that suffocating silence for the first time in decades, Charles understood it was not the throne, not duty, but love, however belated, that was the most sacred legacy Diana left behind. All of Diana's plans stemmed from a resolve that only someone deeply wounded could understand: the determination to forgive. Not to forgive betrayal, the years of pain, or the long, lonely nights in the cold palace, but to forgive herself for wrong choices, impulsive reactions, and the hopes that had once been shattered. That is why at the end of the summer of 1991, Diana quietly made plans for something that no one, not even those closest to her, could have suspected: a reunion with Charles. The decision to return the entries in her final journal, along with the unsent letter, painted a picture entirely different from the romantic story the media created about her and Dodi Fayed. Diana never intended to stay with Dodi long term. That relationship, if it could be called love, was merely a temporary filling of the emotional void that lingered after the divorce. In a letter to a close friend, she wrote that she knew clearly what was real, what was only an illusion, and the truth, as she felt it, always led her back to Charles. The trip to Paris was merely the final leg of a journey coming to a close. Before leaving London, Diana had arranged everything with such discretion that it was nearly absolute. She contacted Sir Robert Fellows, her brother-in-law, and also the Queen's private secretary, asking him to organize a secret meeting at Windsor Chapel on September 1st, 1999. It was not meant to be a public reunion, nor a declaration before the world, but a private, cautious step, a moment for just her and Charles. Two people who had once loved each other, had once hurt each other, now facing one another again as those who shared old wounds. Diana knew well that Camilla's presence was a reality that could not be erased, but she did not wish to compete or overthrow. What she sought was not the throne, nor the title of princess, but a chance to return as a mother, a companion, and a life partner in the simplest form of love: the draft letter to the Queen. She had even prepared a handwritten letter to Queen Elizabeth II. That letter was written on the night of August 30th, just hours before the fateful trip. In the letter, Diana expressed absolute respect for the Queen's role, addressing her as Your Majesty at the beginning, but ending with the words, "Your daughter-in-law, always." In the letter, Diana wrote, "I know the presence of Camilla is something the royal family and the public have gradually accepted, and I do not expect anything to change. But if possible, I humbly ask to return in another role: a life companion, a silent supporter, a mother to your grandchildren, and someone Charles once loved with all his heart." She also emphasized, "Not because I have no other choice, but because I choose Charles once more, after all that has happened." No words of blame, no lines of resentment. That letter was a declaration of a love that had weathered storms, yet still had the strength to nourish hope. She proposed to withdraw from the spotlight permanently, to focus entirely on Charles's charitable work, willing to become his support so that he could fulfill his role as a future leader. This is what sends chills down one's spine when reading the final lines of the letter. "If I do not have the chance to say this directly, I still hope that one day you will understand why I came back." A stolen ending. The accident in Paris on the night of August 31st, 1997, stole the opportunity for Diana to complete her journey home. Windsor Chapel never received that meeting. The letter was never sent. Charles never knew that just one day later, he would have met again the woman he had once considered the greatest mistake of his life, only to realize, perhaps, she was the last right thing he had left. Sir Robert Fellows was the only person she trusted enough to share her plan, and he kept that secret for nearly 3 decades. Only when the jewelry box and the letters inside were discovered at Mill House, where Camilla once lived, did the truth gradually come to light. No one knows how that box ended up there, nor who had kept it. Only that, when Charles opened the box and saw Diana's familiar handwriting, everything broke open. In the whispers from those old pages, he realized a truth so painful it could never be undone. Diana had come back, but he was too late. A permanent torment. The truth about the reunion plan not only upended Charles's memories, but also forced the British royal family to confront a history they thought had been buried. If Diana had not died, could the royal family have been healed? Could William and Harry have grown up in a less painful environment? And could Charles himself have atoned for his mistakes? The answer will forever remain a blank space no one can fill. All that remains are pages of letters, A cassette tape, a small pendant with the ultrasound image of Elizabeth Rose, and a prolonged silence, like an unfinished note in a love song never fully sung. It was the love song of two people who once loved each other, once lost each other, and once planned to reunite, but time waits for no one. Beneath the guise of a romantic trip to Paris with Dodi Fayed, the truth was that Diana was in a silent race against time, life, and the trust of those she loved most. All the images from the press at that time, the sensual black dress, the alluring smile by the Ritz Hotel pool, and the affectionate embraces with Dodi were only part of the picture. The rest, the part no one ever saw, were the letters, the notes, and the signs of a growing fear inside the woman the world once hailed as a symbol of compassion. Inside an envelope marked "Open only in emergency," Charles found a handwritten letter, clearly penned by Diana in a state of urgency and extreme distress. Her handwriting trembled and wavered, parts of it hudged as if written through tears. The letter was dated August 29th, 1997, just 2 days before she died in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, and it contained a revelation that upended every assumption about why she was in Paris that day. In the letter, Diana confessed that she was being threatened by someone who held classified information about Elizabeth Rose, the daughter she had secretly given birth to and lost in 1985. According to Diana, this person not only knew of Elizabeth's existence but also possessed documents and evidence capable of igniting a scandal larger than anything the royal family had ever faced. What terrified Diana most was that the person hinted they would expose the truth unless she agreed to disappear from public life. She wrote explicitly that she was attempting to trace the blackmailer's identity through her own private network, which had ties to the internal security department of Buckingham Palace. Everything was unfolding in absolute silence. No one was allowed to know, not William, not Harry, not even Charles. Because if this information leaked, it would not only destroy Charles's reputation, but also thrust the two young princes into the center of a media storm and a vortex of public hatred. Once again, just as she had once quietly buried Elizabeth at Althorpe, Diana was willing to sacrifice herself to protect her family. However, her plan had started to leak. There were signs suggesting that paparazzi had not coincidentally known her every move in Paris down to the minute. Diana sensed she was being watched. In the letter, she wrote that if anything happened to her, Charles needed to know that she had never intended to betray him. Every step, every decision, was driven by a single desire to protect his honor and shield their children from a truth too unbearable to endure. Charles's hands trembled. His eyes blurred as he read to that point. What he had once believed to be betrayal, such as Diana's public appearances with Dodi, the rumors of an upcoming engagement, turned out to be merely a veil masking a silent battle fought by the woman he once loved, and perhaps had always loved. Diana had chosen to sacrifice her public image to protect the stability of the royal family. She knew that if the truth about Elizabeth came to light, the one to be blamed would not be her, but Charles himself. And then, at the end of the letter, there was a message that made Charles's heart feel as if it had been gripped tight. "If I don't make it back in time, please tell our children that their mother never stopped loving their father. And if you still have the courage to forgive me, please preserve my image as part of the family, not as a rebel who walked away." Those lines cut deep into the heart of a man for whom it was too late to apologize. As the letter was folded, Charles found one more small item, a black velvet box containing a pendant Diana had always worn, but had never explained. He opened it, and his heart nearly stopped. Inside was an old, blurry ultrasound image, with a handwritten note, Elizabeth Rose, 1985. Beside it was a small photo of Diana and Charles, taken during a rare moment when both were laughing radiantly at Highgrove. At the bottom of the box was a small piece of paper: "I forgave you a long time ago." In that moment, everything seemed to collapse within the king's mind. He realized that the woman he had once let slip from his arms had not only carried away his heart, but also a part of family history, a part of the future they could have built together. Diana was not merely a victim. She was a keeper of secrets, a sacrificer, a woman who never stopped loving even when that love came at the cost of suffering and death. And perhaps the most bitter truth Charles had to face was that Diana had been ready to return, ready to forgive, ready to live a new life with him after everything. But fate had chosen a different path, a path without a second chance, without explanation, without reunion. The trip to Paris, which had seemed like the impulsive getaway of a woman fleeing an old love, turned out to be the final journey of a mother, a lover, and a symbol trying to protect what she had once believed to be most sacred family. And only when Charles reached the heart of that secret did he understand that there are pains that cannot be undone, and there are women who, once lost, leave the whole world forever changed. In the final secret compartment of the box, wrapped in a piece of aging, handwritten paper, Charles found a letter bearing his own familiar handwriting. He realized it was the letter he had written after the divorce with Diana was finalized, but for some reason, he had never sent it. In the letter, Charles confessed a deep fear he had never dared to confront, that he was not strong enough to love someone as intense and pure as Diana. He wrote that her love was too vast, too overwhelming, making him, a man born into rules, dogma, and duty, feel small and unworthy. Charles admitted in the letter that he had chosen Camilla not out of deep love, but because of familiarity, the sense of safety and control. With Camilla, he did not have to fight himself every day. But it was that very ease that had caused him to lose something far greater, a love capable of redeeming two wounded souls. Diana had kept that letter. She hadn't destroyed it, hadn't discarded it in bitterness. She had kept it as a final sign that she still had hope that one day he would have the courage to say those words to her. As Charles folded that piece of paper, his hand trembled. Inside him was not only regret, but a breaking wave of realization. They had loved each other truly, but were trapped between pride, wounds that neither was willing to heal for the other, and a royal institution that suffocated every human emotion. The greatest shock was when he suddenly remembered the night before the accident. He had held the phone, and so had Diana, but neither called. Just one phone call and everything could have changed. They hesitated. They were afraid. And then fate did not wait. Now, when everything was too late, Charles sat in silence before the sunset streaming through the windows of Clarence's house. On the table, the final traces of Diana still lingered, a faint perfume stain on the edge of the paper, an unfinished memory. He had lost Diana, lost Elizabeth Rose, lost the second chance that life does not give to those who are late. And perhaps, what he could never forgive himself for was knowing that Diana's heart had never closed to him, but he had been the one who lacked the courage to step through the door she had once left open.